Good afternoon, everyone. I presume some of you would have already implemented one of the GFSI schemes, that is Global Food Safety Initiative schemes in your facility. This webinar will outline the basic steps involved in the successful implementation of the chosen GFSI standard in your organization and how to avoid some common pitfalls. The intent of the webinar is to provide basic information on the topic to the attendees, of course to you, thus helping them to create interest and explore the topic further. My name is Rama and I'm the Vice President, Product Safety and Research for Perry Johnson Registrar Food Safety Certification, Inc. This is a certification body located in Troy, Michigan. We certify food processing companies and farms to the various GFSI recognized food safety standards. As I just mentioned to you, the intent is to create interest in the topic and help you to explore the subject matter further. This webinar will not provide any suggestion or step-by-step process for the implementation of the GFSI standards. This is just a general overview of how it can be managed through a project management approach. I have divided the contents of the webinar into 4 sections as shown on the slide. Section A will introduce you to both private and regulatory food safety standards. I'm sure you are familiar with the common GFSI standards such as SQF, BRC, FSSC, etc. But I'll have to repeat this for the benefit of others who are now totally new to the type of certification we are talking about. And whoever is implementing the GFSI standard in the organization, this webinar will be of some help. In section B, I'll explain how to implement the chosen GFSI food safety standard as a project, basically project management approach to implementing the GFSI standard. A project management approach to GFSI certification is ideal. This section will explain how it can be achieved through the various phases of project management approach, such as project initiation, project implementation, and project evaluation, and finally project closure. Now, section C, I will outline the common pitfalls in the implementation of the food safety management system. Every project is unique and has unique problems. I will try to explain what the common pitfalls are as far as the project is concerned. This might help you to avoid these potential traps in the successful implementation of the project. Communication during or after audit is not just a one-way traffic. As auditees, you can exercise your rights, and this is what I intend explaining in section 3. What are your rights as an auditee? That's what I'm going to explain in section D. Section A is about introduction to private and regulatory food safety standards. Consumers all over the world are increasingly concerned about food safety. As many of you know, food safety is a shared responsibility of producers, processors, distributors, retailers, regulatory bodies, and consumers. This concept is easy to understand. However, there are a number of variables in the chain that can affect the safety of food. Consumers are increasingly concerned about farm practices, say use of antibiotics and growth hormones in livestock, pesticide residues in crops and animals, and also some bacteriological contamination in raw materials and finished products, poor hygiene, animal disease, food additives, preservatives, etc., etc. Okay. There is a general misconception that regulatory bodies are primarily responsible for ensuring safety of products. The responsibilities of a regulatory body includes protecting consumers from illness or injury caused by food, providing assurance to the public that food is suitable for consumption. Basically, they will have to make sure that the food consumed by the public is suitable for consumption. The other responsibility is to provide health education programs to communicate principles of hygiene and maintain confidence in internationally traded foods, basically protecting the export sector. While the Codex Alimentarius Commission, otherwise known as CAC of the World Health Organization, provides guidelines for food safety, it is a responsibility of the individual regulatory body, that is FDA, for instance, US FDA, to draft rules and regulation for their country. Codex can only provide guidelines. It's not a requirement. However, the member nations can adopt those guidelines and establish their own regulations for food safety. It is this approach that becomes a hurdle to import and export food products. Basically, trade barriers. The responsibility of manufacturers. Now we'll talk about the food safety responsibilities of the industry, manufacturers, for instance. It is to make sure that they provide food that is safe and suitable for consumption of their consumers, maintaining confidence in internationally traded foods, and also ensure consumers have clear and easily understood product information. Basically, I'm talking about labeling. Then what about the responsibilities of consumers? Consumers have specific responsibilities too. They're expected to follow the relevant instructions provided on labels and also apply appropriate food hygiene measures. So let me give you some basic information about private certification schemes. Examples of government-regulated schemes or government-regulated standards are, FSMA is an example of government-regulated food safety standard, whereas here we are talking about private certification schemes. Private certification schemes are formal, documented systems that are administered by private sector. GFSI is an example of that. These certification schemes actually prescribe methods to obtain specific objectives, and typically they involve audits and certification. So the process actually consists of an audit followed by certification. Successful completion of audit will lead to certification. Private certification schemes are generally incorporated into supply chain contract where it becomes a contractual requirement. The main driver of private certification scheme is a market force. So what is the market force? What is the main driver for certification scheme? It is a market force that drives private certification schemes. By implementing certification schemes, companies will be able to manage their food safety hazards, lower their cost of products, at the same time address regulatory requirements, thus reducing liability and retain consumer loyalty. It's quite unlikely private certification schemes will ever replace regulatory standards for obvious reasons. These are two parallel lines. I don't think the FSI scheme will be able to replace regulatory requirements. Regulatory requirements will always remain because that's law. However, private certification schemes can play a role in achieving regulatory objectives. It can complement regulatory objectives or regulatory standards, but private standards can never replace regulatory standards. Okay. While the regulatory oversight cannot be replaced by private certification schemes, there is a move in North America and elsewhere, in fact, globally also, to consider private schemes to be used as a factor within a risk-based framework. Increasingly, regulatory standards have started recognizing the private standards such as GFSI. So let's look into the benefits of third-party certification. I'm sure you are quite familiar with the benefits of third-party certification, but still, for the interest of people who are planning to introduce GFSI, I'll quickly go through the benefits of third-party certification. Third-party certification actually provides compliance with government requirements, because these standards always talk about meeting the regulatory standards. So third-party standards or certification also has the benefit of transparency and aims at continuous improvement. Each and every standard talks about continuous improvement. It's not just the same every time. You have to show that your system is matured year after year. Okay? One major benefit to the industry of third-party certification is the avoidance of duplication of audits. And GFSI's goal is once certified, accepted everywhere. Certification to GFSI benchmark standards provides substantial economic benefits through the avoidance of duplicate audits. Companies that obtain third-party certification have greater opportunities with buying community, thus providing greater market access to their products. So these are some of the major benefits of implementing GFSI standards. And it also protects the brand image, and generally it improves the overall performance through teamwork. Whoever has already implemented GFSI standards will vouch for the fact that implementation of these standards definitely improves the overall performance through teamwork, and it helps to protect brand image. Yeah, let me just give some idea. Let me give you some basic information about GFSI certification. As many of you know, the acronym stands for Global Food Safety Initiative. So what are the objectives? Some of the major objectives, some of the primary objectives of GFSI: reduce food safety risk or risks by delivering equivalence and convergence between effective food safety management systems. Basically, it talks about harmonization of the various food safety standards. And the second objective is to manage cost in the global food safety system by eliminating redundancy and improving operational efficiency. So I've taken these objectives from GFSI website. Basically, there are 4 objectives: reduce food safety risk by delivering equivalence and convergence between, by implementing an effective food safety management system; reduce the cost by eliminating duplication of audits; and develop competencies and capacity building. Basically, it talks about auditor competency requirements. And finally, to provide a unique platform for collaboration, knowledge and exchange, and things like that. Okay. So, in fact, prior to the creation of GFSI in 2000, actually, there was a proliferation of demands for audits. There are hundreds and hundreds of audits actually from major buyers within the food supply chain. Different retailers often apply specific food safety requirements. There was a lot of duplication, and after the implementation of GFSI standards, those things got reduced drastically. And I think, in my opinion, the duplication of audits is greatly reduced. Now, again, many of you are quite familiar with the different types of certification schemes. We have, rather, GFSI recognizes two ISO standards for the purpose, accreditation purpose. One is 17065, ISO 17065 scheme. The other one is ISO 17021 schemes. And the second one, 17021, is supplemented by another ISO standard that is called ISO 22003. Both these standards contain similar requirements for how a certification body must operate. This is not for the industry, this is for the certification body. These standards prescribe the requirement for certification bodies, actually, and they talk about the conflict of interest, managing customer information, confidentiality, things like that, qualifying auditors, auditor calibration, on all aspects related to certification process. Okay. Yeah, let's see. Let's quickly go through some of the GFSI benchmark certification standards before I talk about the roadmap. Again, you're all familiar with the SGIF code. This is a retailer-based certification scheme. Actually, the acronym SGIF stands for Safe Quality Food. This is an industry code for food safety. And this is a retailer-based certification scheme owned by the Food Marketing Institute, USA. So this is a vertically integrated scheme, and the food safety requirements, safety system requirements for the various sectors, such as production, processing, storage, etc. They're all documented. Until 7.2, the version number or edition number 7.2, you had just one code for all the different sectors, but now they have been split into the various standards, one for manufacturing, one for packaging standard, one for storage and distribution, one for primary production, etc., etc. And it's not 3-level certification. It is, that's also going after January 2018. You'll have one for food safety, the other one for food quality. And it's a 2-stage audit that's going to remain, actually. One for document review, the other one is facility audit. Generally, the audit duration is 1 day for document review and a day and a half to 2 for facility audit. Some of you may be familiar with the BRC Family of Standards. Unlike the SQF core, the I'm referring to SQF code 7.2. If you are referring to edition 8, they are almost equal now. So the British Retail Consortium Standards, that has got different standards for different sectors of the food chain. One for the manufacturing sector, one for packaging and packaging material, one for storage. That's what I just mentioned to you in the case of SQF code edition 8. Okay. Now, currently we have issue 7 for food safety, issue 5 for packaging and packaging materials, and things like that. Let's talk about the other type of standard, GFSI standard for manufacturing or processing. This is called IFS, otherwise known as International Featured Standard. This is similar to BRC standard. These are German standards and are similar to BRC standards in respect of audit duration, food safety requirements, etc. The IFS packaging standard, Pack Secure, is new, and recently I think IFS Germany bought the rights from Canada Pack Secure. So now this is managed by the International Featured Standard, Germany. The other type of standard, this is for primary production, fruits and vegetable production, for instance. The Global GAP, Global Good Agriculture Practice Standard, is a farm assurance standard for produce at the farm level. There are different standards under the scheme, and with two different options actually. One for single producers and another one for multiple producers. The most popular standards are Integrated Farm Assurance Standard, otherwise called IFA, for fruits and vegetables, Produce Safety Standard, called PSS Standard, and Local GAP, North America. Global GAP is a business-to-business brand, and this particular thing is not directly visible to consumers. Now let me give you some information about the two ISO 2017 or 21 based food safety management systems. Food Safety System Certification, FSSC 22000. So this is an ISO quality management system based certification, and the scheme is owned and managed by the FSSC Foundation in the Netherlands. This is also a GFSI benchmark scheme, and this focuses on food safety, and now very recently they have included storage and distribution, etc., etc. And again, this is also a two-stage audit. Stage one, an auditor will verify the preparedness for stage two, and in stage two, the effectiveness of implementation will be verified. And the good thing about this is a non-prescriptive standard, unlike the 17065 based standards. Now this is section B. Here I'll explain how to implement GFSI as a project, GFSI standard in your company as a project. Yeah, when an organization decides to implement one of the GFSI certification standards, there's often the inclination to just surge ahead and start doing something without taking the time to consider the best approach for the company. Everybody is in a rush because they want to get certified. But it is important to have sufficient knowledge of the chosen standard and also the HACCP principles before getting certified, because these things are very important for a successful audit. Okay, so to understand, when I talk about HACCP understanding, you must know something about the theory of HACCP and the practicalities of implementing the HACCP principles, and also the chosen GFSI standards. Therefore, if you are new to HACCP or to the food safety standard, as an auditor, I have come across many cases where the people entrusted with the responsibility of implementing the standard is totally new to, or is totally new to the GFSI standard. In that case, you need to familiarize yourself with HACCP. That means you'll have to take a course on HACCP, or you'll have to take a course on the chosen food safety management system. Okay. Also, you must know how to plan the project. You may not be a project manager, but I think you should. You'll be very successful if you followed a project management approach to implementing the project. So that means you should know how to plan the project, how to evaluate and build an effective support system, because this is not going to be just a one-person show. You need a set of people, you need a team of people actually. So how to build an effective support system, how to identify and train people in establishing and managing an effective system. You may be an expert, but you need to work with the team. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? Who can be assigned what, and things like that. Okay, so that is very important. So therefore, any company that is new to food safety management system or HACCP technique will have to acquaint themselves or familiarize themselves with the details of HACCP and details of the standard. Training, the first thing is training. Okay. So I have outlined the 4 stages here. Stage 1, planning and preparation. This is called project planning phase. Then the second phase is food safety management system development, which is called the initiation phase. The third phase is project implementation phase, and the 4th stage is project evaluation, total project management approach to implementing the standard. And this is where I think this is the planning stage. This is where the foundations are laid, and it's important to take some time to ensure the following. Ensure that the appropriate people are identified and trained. So basically in the project planning stage, you're going to identify who's going to do what, and do they have adequate training. Without adequate training, the project success is not guaranteed. And also you need to establish what support systems are already in place and what needs to be developed, some kind of gap analysis, what systems are available to implement the project, but what else needs to be developed, so some kind of gap analysis. And also you have to consider, or you have to choose the most appropriate structure for your system. And at this stage, you have to plan the entire project, including a realistic timetable for development and implementation of the food safety management system. This may come from your senior management. This has to be, the project has to be implemented. We must get certified within 6 months. This is a kind of timeline. This is a kind of information you may be getting from the senior management. Accordingly, you have to work out your project plan. So the first thing is to consider what you're trying to achieve. The path you take to a fully implemented food safety management system will then depend on where you are starting from and the maturity of your existing systems. Again, that has something to do with your gap analysis. Where are you today, and where do you want to be in the next 6 months? Because in the next 6 months, you will be completing your project. And this is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to consider Deming's PDC Act or PDC cycle, plan, do, check, act cycle. So early involvement of senior management. This one talks about making the project team aware of the details, because you are the project team leader and you have to make your team aware of what's going on, what is in stock, and where do you want to be, and what do you have, and things like that. Okay. So you're going to make the senior management aware of the complexities of the project. And this is fundamental to the effective implementation of food safety management system. Because real commitment can only be achieved if there is complete understanding of what it takes to develop and maintain a food safety program, and how the food safety management system fits into the overall strategic direction of the company. If the senior management does not understand the complexities of the project, probably this project is not going to be quite successful. Okay, so senior managers do need a basic understanding of, they need to know something about the food safety hazards and how to control them. So that means an 101 on food safety hazards is also needed for the senior management. Then the other one is identification of a food safety steering group. So we're talking about a food safety team. You need to provide in-depth education or training to the team so that you know your project is well managed. Some functional senior managers plus food safety team leader are also vital to form this group. So it's always good to include some senior people, senior management team in the food safety team. And what about the food safety team leader? Obviously, any team will have a leader. So the food safety team leader will have to play a key role in the success of the food safety management system. And in the leadership role, the team leader will be responsible for the following. Number one, the team leader, the team leader has to make sure that the team members have sufficient knowledge and expertise on the subject. That is your food safety subject. The individual skills and attributes are taken into account. That's one of the characteristics of a good leader. What to assign to whom? That is basically, you know, what are the skills of the team members and what responsibilities need to be assigned to those people. Then individual training and development needs, because the team leader has to recognize the training needs of the team. And also the team leader has to organize the work adequately. So the behavior within the team must be supportive. It should not be confrontational. Again, it's a responsibility of the team leader to have a cohesive team so that they understand one another and then take the instruction from the team leader and implement them effectively and bring the whole project to successful completion. In fact, the food safety management team, the senior management, and any other personnel you identify for the implementation of the project, they will all need to be considered, monitored, and any changes to be made to these things, that is also the responsibility of the team leader to make sure that these are implemented at the appropriate time. Okay. Such as this may also include external help from supervisors, even from suppliers. Okay, this is about doing baseline audit and gap analysis. It's important to evaluate the resources and systems in place and compare these against the requirements to manage the food safety management system as a project effectively before putting together a project plan. So now, even before putting a project plan, you need to understand what the current status is and where do you want to be in the next 6 months, if 6 months is your timeline. So this is going to include a review of the assessment of the current systems and personnel resources. So in order to plan the pathway, it is important to ask 2 basic questions. And these are the questions I have indicated on this slide. That is, what resources and systems need to be in place for the food safety management system to work, and what resources and systems does the organization currently have? Okay. The differences between these two are the gaps, and that will need to be filled. So this is done even before the project planning stage. Once you have done this, you should know what to address and how long it's going to take to address these things. A third question, that is, how will I get there? How will I complete the project in 6 months? This will also come up. The most effective way of identifying the gaps is to carry out a baseline audit of the current systems and procedures using auditors with expert knowledge of the standards and systems. That doesn't mean you cannot use your internal resources. If you have a competent person who can do that, well and good, you can go ahead and do it. But it is always good to use someone who is familiar with the standards. So if, for instance, you are implementing SQF standard or SQF code, you are going to hire an auditor to do the gap analysis, who can bring out the gaps so that, all the gaps so that you can address them effectively before your audit, actually. Okay. Following the gap analysis, the project plan can be developed by using a standard project planning technique. So once you have identified the gaps, then these are the gaps that you are going to include in your project plan. Like gap 1, gap 2, gap 3, gap N. You document all those things in your project plan and find out what is required, when that one needs to be completed, because sometimes without completing gap 1, you cannot go to gap 2. So in those cases, that is where the project planning will help you, actually. Now let us understand, we have been talking about project all the time. So what is a project? These are the characteristics of a project. It has, number one, it has clear objectives based on need. It has a beginning and end. It's not continuous. It's not indefinite. It has a definite beginning and an end. It has defined goals and deliverables along with timeline. It requires resources in terms of time and money. It has clearly defined scope. So when you prepare a plan, when you prepare a project plan, you should keep these things in mind. Okay. So what is my objective? My objective is to get certified to SQF or BRC standard. And when do I want the certification to become, the project to be completed? So for instance, it has to be completed in the next 6 months. So when are we going to start? We are going to start tomorrow. From tomorrow, another 6 months. So that is the beginning and end of the project. And what are the goals and deliverables? Okay. Are we going to prepare manuals? Are we going to implement this? Are we going to implement that? So these things are going to come up during, these things can be identified during your gap analysis. And once you have identified the gaps, you will come to know what resources are required. Do I need any extra person? Do I need any new equipment and things like that? That is what you talk about in the resources required, resources in terms of time, money, etc., etc. And obviously, each project will have a sponsor. Who is going to be your sponsor? Your senior management is going to be your sponsor. Basically, you are CEO, president of the company, because it's a business decision. And all these business decisions are taken by the senior most person in the company, namely CEO or vice president or things like that. Okay, and because they will have to provide funds, they will have to support you and things like that. Okay, let me just give you some important tips. So it will be a good idea to organize. We're talking about 2 or 3 things actually. Tip 1, documentation. It will be a good idea to organize your documentation to 4 levels. That is policies. You may call it level 1. Again, if you are familiar with ISO 9000, actually you're familiar with all these things. Level 1, policies. Level 2, procedures. Level 3, work instructions. And level 4, forms. The first level of document is a food safety manual, and it is separate from other procedures. So the top tier, that is level 1, you have the policies and you have the food safety manual. The policy portion of the manual should state the company's policy regarding applicable clauses, sections of the GFSI standard. And all these standards require you to come up with policies. how are you going to address each and every requirement of this section? You'll have to state, if it is document control, for example, document control is addressed in our procedure 1, 2, 3. Or record keeping, this procedure is addressed in procedure ABC, something like that. Now let's go to the second level of documentation. The second level of documentation should be more detailed and address the procedures of an activity. So that is where you develop SOPs actually. Again, going back to the document control example, you're going to state in the document control procedure how to approve the documents, how to revise the documents, how to make documents obsolete and things like that. So these are the things that you're going to document in detail in your standard operating procedures or simply procedures. So then what about work instructions? Work instructions are detailed that outline how to accomplish a specific job or a task. So this could be operation of a machine. That cannot be in the procedure. That has to be in the form of work instruction. How to operate a pasteurizer, how to operate a sterilizer. So that means you will have to detail out the procedure, the steps involved in operating that particular machine or a particular task. Okay, so that is work instruction. And the last level of documentation is to keep or maintain forms. Actually, you may be using a number of forms using which you are going to create records. So you will have to have you'll have to maintain certain forms also in your system. So this is the these are the 4 tiers of your documentation. So you need to demonstrate that you have the documents, and you have to maintain these documents. Tip 2 is the food safety manual implementation. Okay. Now, the first step in the development of your food safety manual is the creation of manual itself. This is separate and distinct from developing food safety system procedures. So manual is a condensed version of what you're going to do in the food safety management system. It doesn't have to be very detailed, but the purpose is to state briefly the policies and objectives of the company to achieve food safety in your organization. So always organize your food safety manual by major headings for easy reference. Okay. If it is corrective action procedure, non-conforming procedure, document control, records maintenance, and things like that. So arrange them, rather organize your manual by way of major headings. Okay. Always have an index of documents of the manual. That's quite obvious. That's no brainer at all. That helps in retrieving the documents easily, and use simple, easy to understand statements to avoid confusion and also to provide clarity. Don't make it too complicated. In fact, sometimes you can also have your procedures documented as a flowchart. Make it more visual. That is also quite acceptable. And documents are always dynamic and keep changing. Okay, so revisions should have an effective date. If you're going to revise your documents, make sure that they have an effective date, and make sure that these revised documents are distributed to all personnel who hold the initial copies, actually. Otherwise, this could become, and an auditor may verify whether people have the most recent version of the document. So you have to make sure that these copies or the revised copies are distributed. If it is electronic, it's quite simple. If it is purely manual, then I think you have to make sure that the most recent copy is available with all personnel. Okay, and also keep records of revisions made. Now, this is about training, actually. Okay. You should ensure your company employees are competent, trained, and continually they are upgraded with regard to their knowledge and skills. You should also establish the necessary competencies for personnel whose activities may have an impact on food safety. Basically, we are talking about training needs analysis. You may have job descriptions for different positions, but that's not going to be a 100% match with the skills of people you have employed. So there is going to be some gap, and that is where you analyze the gap. You assess the gaps and make sure those gaps are addressed. That means you will have to provide training. Actually, this training could be on food safety, GMP, hygiene, even CCP training, food defense, food fraud, and etc. etc. So this also consists of providing training to new employees. An auditor will look for the effectiveness of training for new employees, how those people are trained, whether they're trained adequately on rather in hygiene, in food safety, and things like that. These things can be verified through interviews by an auditor. So you will have to make sure that your new employees are also trained adequately or trained well. What about ongoing training? And this is definitely a process that auditors are interested in. It's not just providing training one time. You will have to make sure that refresher training takes place at least annually. And how do you assess training effectiveness? What is your method? Do they undergo a test? Do they undergo some kind of observation before they signed off? Things like that will be verified by auditors during the audit. And maintain appropriate training records. Records, because record is a proof that you have done it actually. So as auditors, we're always interested in verifying records. So keep appropriate training records. Now, so these are some tips for effective implementation of the chosen standard. And let me quickly go through some pitfalls in the implementation of food safety management system. What are the common pitfalls in the implementation of the chosen food safety management system? The first thing that comes to our mind is lack of management support. Senior management standing behind the food safety management program is absolutely critical to the success of the initiative. Okay, you will definitely agree with me. When you are seeking senior management support, you should be fully prepared with facts and figures, because they understand, the senior management understands only the language of costs. So you have to go with facts and figures. Your plan should include a detailed description of the entire program, including goals, cost savings, budgetary considerations, etc., etc. So you should be well prepared before you go and sit with the senior management and explain what is needed, what is not needed to achieve project success, actually. Okay. The other one is company culture. Company culture is also important. Company culture is actually driven from the top. For a company to create a strong safety culture, all employees need to know that senior management views food safety as a key element. Okay, so that means everybody in the company should know that this is supported by the senior management. Okay, and that is very important. Otherwise, any superficial support by the senior management will get revealed in no time, and people down the line, they're not going to be actively involved in the project. So that means, you know, you're definitely inviting project failure over there. Okay. The other one is team makeup not including all relevant functions actually. So this problem has a variety of causes, including resource constraints and the failure to recognize the value of other functions in obtaining encompassing view of the project, etc., etc. So the key is to ensure that all functions affected by the process are involved in the project. This is, I'm talking about the project management process. Everybody should get involved in the project. Whoever has been identified to be important, to be responsible for doing something in the project, I think you have to get the wholehearted support of those people actually. Okay. Other common pitfalls are inadequate performance measure. So this is a project. I told in the beginning itself that you need to monitor, you are required to monitor the progress of the project. So how will you monitor the progress of the project? That means you will come up with performance measures, okay? Key performance indicator kind of thing for projects. And if the performance measures are inadequate, the project is going to fail. And ineffective project management. I'm not saying you should be a project management professional, but try to understand the basics of a project, successful project, and then implement the project management approach there. And the success also depends on effective documentation. Detailed project plan, detailed performance measures, and detailed project reports, etc., etc. So these are some of the things required for effective implementation of the project. Otherwise, these are going to be some common pitfalls in implementing the project. Now, lastly, I would like to just give you some idea about your rights as an auditee. And all the time we have been talking about audits, but you're going to face an auditor, okay? But then you should know your rights. And this is what I'm going to quickly explain in this section. All GFSI schemes require certification bodies to provide a copy of the contract. That includes as a minimum certain things: the scope of the audit, the certification body's fee structure, the conditions under which the audit is going to be suspended, terminated, and things like that, or the certificate is the conditions under which the certificates will be issued or withdrawn or suspended, and the CB, that is the certification body's appeals, complaints, and dispute procedures. So these are your rights, and when you get into a contract with the certification body, please make sure that all these are addressed. That means you have to get a contract with all those things I just mentioned to you. And all certification bodies are required to document its procedures for handling and resolving appeals, complaints, and disputes. So you've got, if you're not quite satisfied with an auditor, if you're not quite satisfied with the audit process, you have got every right to raise it with the CB first. And if not, then you can go to the certification program owners, or CPO, otherwise they're called CPOs. Previously they were called licensing authority, licensing bodies, and things like that. Okay, and when you talk about complaints, disputes, and appeals, always the CBs will have detailed procedures for handling complaints, handling disputes and appeals, and even records of complaints and investigation. They also must be maintained by the CB, and they must be made available to the interested parties. Interested parties are maybe accreditation bodies. Even sometimes licensing bodies will ask the CB to furnish details of the complaints. So that is about it. And if you have any questions, I know this was quite brief, but I think this is what we can do in an hour. And if you have any specific questions, I can answer now, or you can send us emails, and we'll be more than willing to respond to your questions. Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you.